Good. Okay, let's launch straight into this. First place was New York. So what stood out in New York?
Well, generally what stood out to me was I was really surprised how creative the energy felt, because historically New York is kind of known as being more of a kind of commercial business first in terms of the fashion, and the kind of DIY creative scene is kind of placed at lesser value to the big brands like Michael Kors and Tory Burch. But the first show I went to was called Women's History Museum, and it's this new brand which they're kind of like an art collective / fashion house, and they actually have a secondhand vintage shop which I went to after the show. There were people from the industry, you could tell it was getting kind of respect, but there was also this massive crowd of kind of the art community, kids wearing it, this excitement around getting dressed and kind of making your own things, kind of maybe being inspired by what's on the runway and making your own interpretation of that, not needing to buy the whole thing. And it was just this more kind of rough around the edges take on fashion that I don't necessarily expect from New York, but actually set a really exciting and energetic tone. I mean, on that topic, before we kind of move on from New York, I think we should talk about Willy Chevalier, because...
Yes, because he's a name that we've talked about quite a lot.
Yeah.
Why has he only come out in the last couple of years?
I almost think when Willy presents a show, it is heavily referencing Chicano culture, but I think he's also proposing this new idea of what workwear is in America, what streetwear is in America, beyond the white lens of something like Tommy Hilfiger and Ralph Lauren.
I think what Coach does is it shows you that balance of what I was saying at the start, this commerce which is so inherent to New York fashion, the kind of business of selling and your plain white American t-shirt, and something like Willy, who's really changing what the American uniform looks like on a public stage, and then brands like Milan and Women's History Museum who are doing something more kind of DIY and subversive. And I think that's why New York was exciting, is it felt like a balance of all of these things rather than just shoving product down your neck.
So let's say bye to New York.
Say bye to New York.
Go to London.
Well, I just think casting is an interesting topic to talk about, because of that relationship a designer can form with their kind of key model, and how a lot of designers will build up that relationship, and how they kind of the look of their brand with the key model that they bring back each season. Someone Josh and I both are really obsessed with is Aaron Esch, a designer in London. He's a new designer. This is his third collection. Aaron's now working with Katie England, who's his stylist.
Oh yes, I heard that.
I think I mentioned this to you before I left. So Lux, who is Katie's son, I'm just finding, basically came in for a casting for I think the previous show, and Aaron became obsessed with them, loved their style, how they kind of walked on the studio, so they kind of became their muse, and then that's how Aaron and Katie kind of became Katie said, if you ever need any help with guidance, and basically let Aaron go into her amazing archive of clothes, a lot of them by McQueen.
There seems to be quite a lot of talk around young Lux.
He's worked a lot of the big shows, especially in London. He was at Moola too, which was really interesting to see.
Yeah, so tell me about Moola.
It wasn't a traditional show. I mean, there was a runway and there were models, but Moola, from the first look coming out, she led this army of clones of herself, all wearing these latex red tube tops, and then the show was basically her performing 10 tracks from what I'm assuming is her upcoming mixtape, and then having features come out and rapping or singing along with her. So there was a real palpable energy in the room. Everyone was super hyped up for it. Everyone was super excited to be there. And it was an energy that I don't think I experienced through the whole of London. And it just felt incredible.
The controversial nature of Lola's work. I think that's also the problem some people had by her kind of taking these totems of culture and not doing them justice in some people's eyes.
A lot of Black Americans online have a problem with her and how she looks at Atlanta's rap scene and the southern states and the Black culture there, and really references that in her work when she isn't a part of that. So people have
kind of cut and paste.
People have been critical. I do think the show was a spectacle, and it was an amazing spectacle. And
Sounds
I thought this season, there were a handful of shows that felt like a real privilege to kind of experience that in person. I would put Aaron's show up there because I thought the clothes just moved so fantastically. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but Paulo Carzana's show really felt like that. It was held in his backyard in East London.
So these photos from the lookbook are taken outside the front of the house, just literally in the street. But the show itself was in his back garden. He kind of came down the stairs. We walked through his flat, came down the stairs outside, and I don't know, how many people do you think there were? Like 30
50?
max?
Yeah, it was a
like on
handful.
tiny benches, and then the models kind of came down and did a kind of theatrical kind of performance. But I think sometimes when you have a performance at a fashion show, it can sometimes feel kind of awkward and strange, and this didn't, though he managed to get the lighting right. They had these spotlights, and there was scaffolding on the next door house, and they'd,
somebody in a pond.
Yes,
pond?
the
a tiny
opening look, this look, was, I think, loosely referencing Caravaggio's Narcissus.
Right.
So he walked out and kind of circled the pond and looked longingly at himself in the reflection. I think London was amazing this season. I think a lot of the rough edges that have always defined London's talent were really smoothed out by the young designers who are really finding their footing, like Aaron Ash and Paulo. And we didn't mention it, but Michael Stewart at Standing Ground, who won the Savoir Faire Prize at the LVMH Prize this year. So there's a real drive towards refinement and sophistication from a city that I think notoriously has always been a bit more DIY and a bit more uninhabited in its creativity.
Okay, so we need to move on from London to Milan.
Milano. I think a massively underrated but exciting brand is Ferragamo, which is designed by Maximilian Davis, who's actually a London designer. So he was part of Fashion East, and then he got snaffled up by Ferragamo. I think he was a finalist in the LVMH Prize, and then he dropped out to become the designer at Ferragamo. And I think what he does is really beautiful. I mean, he's got a job on his hand. He's got to build up Ferragamo and make it relevant and interesting, but he hasn't. You know, earlier we were talking about going for this much younger audience, and that's not what Maximilian's trying to do at his own label. It was always about this kind of sharp, beautiful tailoring and elegance, and I think that sensibility is something that's still
you showing me that could only be Milan. Just those pictures could only be Milan.
Don't you think?
Well, it's that,
I mean,
it's luxurious and rich and not a tall street and very coloured.
Yeah, I mean, Milan's kind of craft heritage.
Yeah. And who else was good in Milan?
Bottega.
And what was it at Bottega that caught your eye?
I really enjoyed this kind of idea of childhood dressing, and he really played with the mundane, quote-unquote, adult uniform through proportion. So a lot of the opening tailoring looks have really misproportioned lapels and these giant shoulders that kind of just hang off the models as if children were playing in their parents' wardrobe. But again, it's utilizing the resources at Bottega's disposal to take these really pure ideas of fashion, of dressing up, and creating them at the height of luxury. I want to talk a little bit about Moschino.
Okay, what's happening at Moschino?
It's the second show from their new creative director, Adrienne Apiolaza.
But that brand was so Moschino when it was Moschino, so Jeremy Scott when it was Jeremy Scott. And is this person, you think they're doing something new and exciting?
It feels interesting. So he's from Buenos Aires, but I'm pretty sure he was part of that Phoebe Philo-Celine crew.
Yeah, he was.
So he's one of her disciples, essentially. It's the opening looks that I found really fascinating, because he talks about, again, this idea of childhood dressing comes up, and taking sheets from the laundry and draping them around you and creating something beautiful out of what you have as a child.
So it's kept the surrealism, but has lost the sort of
that
tongue-in-cheek kitsch thing.
Pop artiness that Jeremy Scott really pushed and propelled. And
Adrian kind of did more, there was kind of literal baguettes and stuff last season, do you remember?
Yeah, there's still nods to that real playfulness.
But it feels less so in this, which I think.
Yeah, it feels a lot more kind of stripped back to simple ideas.
Yeah, there's something going on there that's not the same.
Should we move to Paris?
Let's move to Paris.
It was Valentino, which is Alexandre Mck's debut.
Yes.
People will know Alessandro Michele for, in a similar way to what Jeremy Scott did at Moschino. Alessandro really put Gucci ready to wear back on the map after the Tom Ford 90s era.
Yeah.
So this is his debut at Valentino, and the show space was kind of all these old antique kind of bits of furniture covered in a sheet, as if he's coming into this old house and is pulling back the sheet. Everyone has kind of been saying that they feel like this feels very Gucci.
Yeah.
I really loved it.
Why?
I think...
I'm not saying I shouldn't, but what was your reason for loving it?
I think what I like about what Alessandro does is it's this kind of fantasy of different characters. He's so great at building characters through clothes and making new, or at least I get excited about the clothes and the kind of looks that he puts together. And I think it's nice to have something like that going on rather than these just propositions of clear kind of product. I do understand the criticism though that this does feel similar to his Gucci, but I also think designers should be allowed to have their kind of signatures and their aesthetics. I actually loved the Chanel show. Again, just what made me think of it is this is done by the studio team. Virginie Viard's left. This is their intermediary collection before a new creative director is announced.
And who do we think?
I would gag if Eddie Simon did it.
So who do we think's in the running? I mean, we can all be
Eddie Simon is what everyone is saying is going to happen.
Jacques Mus is also being thrown around as if that's a possibility.
Just to quickly show you. So Eddie was the creative director of Celine, and he put out his final Womenswear collection, which is literally...
Yes, it's Chanel.
saying I would be great at Chanel, which is a very Eddie thing to do.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, he's going to look a bit foolish if he doesn't get it then.
Well, yeah.
But I think it's also him saying, even if I don't do this, this is what I would have done. It's really great.
Fair enough.
This was actually probably one of the most exciting shows I've ever been to, just because I've never been to the Grand Palais before.
Right.
And they haven't shown there in a few years because it's been under reconstruction.
Yeah. So this is Atelier doing it. So we can't tell much. I guess it's a holding pattern. They can't go too far.
No, this isn't really saying what the next Chanel's going to be.
Okay, we need to wrap up. Is there anybody, Josh, you think we haven't mentioned in Paris, or anybody, Hetty, you think we should do?
I'm a big fan of Demna and what he does, and I thought this Balenciaga collection was very strong for him. I think it's also really interesting that in this ever ongoing game of musical chairs we're playing, that Balenciaga renewed their contract with Demna after the show.
I think it's really interesting that actually they've re-signed Demna, and that it's good in one sense to see conglomerates this is owned by Kering not just treat designers like they can just drop them left, right and centre, and actually reinvesting in them and collaborating with them in the long term.
I really would love to be a fly on the wall to understand what his relationship is with the Atelier, but also with kind of the suits at Balenciaga, because I mean, because it was people who don't engage with fashion that were really hammering home this idea that he should be fired and rallying on social media that it was...
Then there's a whole bunch of people that just like to cross. Any great soundtracks?
Oh, Louis Vuitton was amazing.
Was it? Who did it?
I actually need to find the name of who does this. Michel Gaubert used to do it. I don't know if he does anymore, but Nicolas Gasquier, this is his 10th year at Vuitton, and I remember seeing one of his early shows on YouTube or something when I kind of just started really being interested in fashion, and I just became obsessed with the soundtrack, I remember, and this show was the same. He always does these kind of mashups of different songs, but it always, I don't know, it just creates this incredible atmosphere and really shows you the power of a great soundtrack to kind of sell a show.
What would describe the season if you had to describe the season?
I think for me this season, the weight of how much of a global business fashion has become feels both really exciting and alive, but also you can feel the weight that hangs on designers and how quickly we're shuffling through designers at houses. So there's a feeling this season where we had so many new designers at new brands, and I feel like there's still this instability in fashion where people feel disposable and ideas feel disposable, and I'd like to see some more kind of stability, I guess, in fashion where we invest and give people time to let things grow rather than it being so based on numbers and so disposable.
Yeah.